That morning, no one expected a single act of defiance to change military history. What began as routine training became a moment every soldier on base would remember, and one that would test the difference between following orders and doing what's right. The sun hung low over the rugged hills of eastern Afghanistan, casting long shadows across the forward operating base. Dust swirled in lazy eddies around the boots of the assembled platoon, their camouflage uniforms crisp despite the grit that clung to everything. Lieutenant Elena Vasquez stood at attention in the formation, her posture rigid, eyes fixed on the horizon where the Hindu Kush mountains blurred into the haze. At 29, she was one of the few women in Naval Special Warfare Group 1, a SEAL officer who had earned her trident through grueling Bud-S and deployments that tested the limits of endurance. Her dark hair was pulled tight under her patrol cap, and her gloved hands rested at her sides, fingers steady. The company commander, Major Harlan Reed, paced the front of the line, his voice cutting through the morning chill like a Ka bar knife. "Platoon, attention!" The snap of heels on packed earth echoed, a disciplined rhythm that bound them all. Reed was a veteran of Fallujah, his face etched with lines from years under fire, and he commanded respect without raising his volume. Today's exercise simulated hostage recovery. Intel reports a village elder taken by insurgents, rebels we've tracked for weeks. No negotiations. We go in. We extract. We neutralize threats. Clear? "Clear, sir!" The platoon responded in unison, their voices a low thunder. Elena felt the familiar surge of focus settle over her, the kind that came from months of drills in Coronado and endless patrols in the sandbox. Beside her stood Petty Officer Marcus Hale, her swim buddy from training days, a broad-shouldered operator with a scar running down his jaw from a helo crash in Iraq. They had run 100 miles together, shared foxholes in the dead of night, and trusted each other with their lives. Hale shot her a quick glance, the corner of his mouth twitching in silent solidarity, no words needed in the chain of command. The briefing tent hummed, with the low crackle of radios and the scent of stale coffee mixed with gun oil. Maps were unrolled on folding tables, marked with red pins for enemy positions and blue for friendly lines. Reed pointed to a cluster of dots near the village of Karabat. "Rebels here, dug in with AKs and maybe RPGs. They've got the Elder as leverage, but HQ's directive is firm. We don't negotiate with terrorists. This is DevGru territory. SEALs handle it clean and quiet." Elena studied the terrain, her mind mapping infill routes through the wadis and dry riverbeds. She had led similar ops, slipping through shadows to recover assets, always adhering to the rules of engagement. But something nagged at her from the latest intel brief, a whisper from local assets about the Elder's daughter, a young medic who had treated coalition wounded before the rebels turned. As the platoon geared up, the air filled with the metallic clink of magazines loading into M4 carbines and the soft whir of NVGs being checked. Elena adjusted her plate carrier, the weight familiar against her shoulders, and ran a hand over the Velcro patch on her sleeve, her unit's insignia, a silent vow of loyalty. Hale handed her a suppressor for her sidearm. "You good, Vasquez?" he asked, his tone all business. "Affirmative," she replied, holstering it. "Just another day in paradise." They both knew the stakes. Insurgents didn't play by Geneva rules, and one wrong move could turn a recovery into a firefight. The chopper pads thrummed in the distance, Black Hawks warming up with that deep rotor wash that vibrated through the ground. Elena's thoughts drifted briefly to her last leave, the quiet beach in San Diego where she'd walked alone, questioning if the endless cycle of orders and ops left room for anything else. But doubt had no place here. The chain of command was ironclad, a structure that kept chaos at bay. By midday, the platoon was airborne, the helo's cabin a cocoon of focused silence, broken only by the pilot's voice over the intercom. 5 mics to LZ. Elena peered out the open door, the landscape below a patchwork of terraced fields and mud brick compounds. Karabat came into view, smoke rising lazily from cook fires. As they fast roped down into a ravine, a click out, boots hitting soft earth with muffled thuds, the team fanned out in wedge formation. Elena took point on the overwatch, her scope trained on the village perimeter. The air smelled of dry sage and distant wood smoke, the kind that masked ambushes. Radio chatter was minimal, clipped and professional. Alpha team in position, eyes on objective. Hale's voice in her earpiece, steady as ever. They crept forward, shadows among the rocks, until the rebel camp materialized. A cluster of tents ringed by scrub brush, guarded by 3 sentries with slung rifles. Through her binoculars, Elena spotted the elder, an older man in a faded pakol hat, bound to a post near a fire pit, his face bruised but defiant. Nearby, a girl, no older than 20, huddled with a makeshift bandage on her arm, her eyes scanning the tree line as if sensing their presence. Then it happened. A sentry barked an order, shoving the girl toward the elder. She stumbled, dropping a small satchel that spilled medical supplies, bandages, iodine vials, the tools of someone who healed rather than harmed. Elena's grip tightened on her rifle. Intel hadn't mentioned her being there, but now it was clear. The rebels had her too, perhaps as a bargaining chip or worse. Reed's voice crackled over the net. "Hold position. Wait for the signal. No heroics. We extract the primary only." Elena's heart rate ticked up, not from fear, but from the fracture she felt forming. The girl looked up, her gaze locking onto the ridge where Elena lay concealed. In that instant, across the distance, Elena saw not an enemy, but a reflection of the medics she'd worked with, the ones who patched wounds under fire, bound by an oath that transcended sides. Duty screamed to hold, to follow the op plan, but conscience whispered of the cost, leaving her to whatever fate the rebels decreed. As the team inched closer, Hale whispered into the comms, "Vasquez, you seeing this? That girl's no fighter." Eleanor didn't respond immediately. The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of the girl's voice pleading in Pashto. The chain of command was clear. HQ's policy etched in every briefing. No negotiations, no risks for non-essentials. Yet Elena's mind raced through the implications, a life discarded like spent brass. She lowered her binos, her breath steady, but her resolve wavering for the first time in years. The signal came, a suppressed round from Overwatch dropping the nearest sentry. The camp erupted in shouts, figures scrambling for weapons. Elena rose to a knee, sighting her target, but her finger hesitated on the trigger. In that suspended moment, with the platoon advancing and chaos unfolding, she made a choice that would echo through the ranks, one that blurred the line between soldier and human. The chaos in the rebel camp unfolded like a poorly rehearsed drill. Shouts in Pashto slicing through the thin mountain air as the sentries dropped one by one under precise, suppressed fire. Elena's team moved with the fluid precision of years in the shadows, wedge formation tightening, bounding Overwatch covering each advance. Her M4 was steady in her hands, the polymer grip worn smooth from countless patrols, but her eyes weren't on the threats. They were on the girl, who had scrambled to her feet amid the spilled satchel, clutching a single vial of antiseptic like a talisman. The elder twisted against his bonds, his voice hoarse as he called to her, urging her to run. "Primary in sight," Reed's voice cut over the net, calm and commanding. "Breach on my mark. Vasquez, cover the north flank, suppress any runners." Elena acknowledged with a clipped "Roger," shifting her position behind a jagged boulder, the rough stone scraping her elbow through her sleeve. Dust from the rotor wash still lingered in her nostrils, mixing with the acrid tang of cordite from the first shots. Hale was 10 meters to her right, his silhouette low and lethal, picking off a rebel who broke for the tree line. The op was textbook: extract the elder, neutralize hostiles, exfil under covering fire. HQ's directive echoed in her mind. No negotiations, no deviations. Lives hung on that discipline. But as the girl darted toward the elder, dodging a fallen body, Elena saw the makeshift bandage on her arm darken with fresh blood. Not from a weapon, but from the chaos, a shard of pottery or debris. The rebels weren't organized, they were scrambling, one grabbing for an AK that skittered across the dirt. Elena's scope found him, the crosshairs steady on his center mass. Squeeze the trigger, end the threat. That's what the chain of command demanded. Yet her finger hovered, the weight of the choice heavier than her plate carrier. The girl reached the elder, fumbling with the ropes, her hands trembling but determined. She wasn't armed. She was trying to free him, not fight. "Vasquez, status?" Hale's query in her earpiece, urgent but controlled. "Flank clear," she replied, voice even, though her pulse thrummed in her temples. The team closed in, Reed leading the breach with flashbangs popping like distant thunder. Smoke billowed, figures coughing and silhouetted against the fire pit. The elder was halfway untied when a rebel lunged from a tent, knife raised, not at the SEALs, but at the girl. Elena's shot rang out, the suppressor muffling it to a cough, dropping him mid-stride. The girl froze, eyes wide, locking onto Elena's position for the second time that day. In that gaze, there was no fear of the enemy, only a raw plea that transcended languages. Reed's voice again. "Elder secured. Secondary assets. Negative. Exfil now." The platoon consolidated, Hale hauling the elder over his shoulder in a fireman's carry, the old man's weight sagging but his grip firm on Hale's harness. Elena rose, rifle sweeping the perimeter, but as the team pulled back toward the ravine, the girl staggered after them, one hand outstretched, the other pressed to her wound. She called out in broken English, words lost in the wind. "Help! Please! No fight!" Elena's boot caught on loose gravel as she backpedaled, covering their retreat. The helo's rotors were a distant whine growing louder, the LZ a beacon in the fading light. Duty pulled her toward the extraction point, the op's success measured in the elder's safe return. But conscience rooted her for a split second, the image of the girl collapsing to her knees amid the dead searing into her memory. Leaving her meant condemning her to the rebels' remnants, or worse, exposure in the open, bleeding out under the indifferent stars. Elena had seen it before, locals caught in the crossfire, their stories buried in after-action reports. "Hold up," she muttered into the comms, low enough that only Hale might catch it. He glanced back, brow furrowed under his helmet, but said nothing. Trust in the bond they shared, forged in the surf and sand of Bud S. Reed was ahead, directing the elder into the helo's shadow. Elena broke formation, a single step toward the camp, then another. Her rifle stayed slung. She raised empty hands, palms out, the universal sign. "Stand down," she transmitted, overriding protocol. "I'm going back for the secondary. She's a medic, non-combatant." Static crackled, then Reed's response, sharp as a reprimand. "Negative, Vasquez, that's not the op. Get to the bird, now." The team paused at the ravine edge, Hale turning fully, his expression a mix of concern and calculation. The elder, propped against a rock, watched her with rheumy eyes, murmuring in Pashto. Elena ignored the net, her focus narrowing to the girl, now crawling forward, leaving a faint trail in the dust. The wind carried the scent of blood and smoke, the sun dipping behind the hills, painting the scene in stark oranges and blacks. She moved deliberately, boots silent on the earth, hands visible and empty. No weapon, no backup, just the weight of her trident pin against her chest, a reminder of the oaths she'd sworn. The remaining rebels had scattered, shadows fleeing into the scrub, but stragglers watched from afar, rifles uncertain. Eleanor closed the distance, dropping to one knee beside the girl. Up close she was younger than Eleanor thought. 19. Maybe, with dirt-streaked cheeks and a hijab askew. "It's okay," Elena said softly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline. I'm here to help. The girl flinched, then nodded, her hand relaxing its grip on the wound. As Elena tore a strip from her own utility pouch to bind the injury, radio chatter exploded in her ear, Reed demanding her position, Hale covering her six with suppressed bursts at distant figures. The helo hovered, downdraft whipping sand into a frenzy. This was the violation, the line crossed in broad daylight, witnessed by her team, the Elder, and whatever eyes peered from the hills. HQ would dissect it later. Why risk the primary for an unknown? But in that moment, with the girl's pulse weak under her fingers, Elena felt the fracture widen. Obedience had its place, but so did the humanity that bound soldiers to something greater than orders. The girl whispered her name, Zara, and pointed toward the village, words tumbling in Pashto about her father, the Elder, and a hidden cache of supplies that could aid the wounded on both sides. Eleanor's mind raced. Intel like this could shift patrols, save lives. But extracting it meant staying, unarmed in enemy territory, defying the chain that had defined her career. Hale's voice broke through. Vasquez, 30 seconds, or we're wheels up without you. She met Zara's eyes, seeing the mirror of her own resolve, the quiet strength of those who healed amid the storm. Decision made, Elena helped Zara to her feet, supporting her weight as they stumbled toward the ravine. Shots pinged off rocks behind them, rebels regrouping. The team laid down fire, pulling them into the fold just as the helo's ramp dropped. Reed's glare met hers as she boarded, the Elder clasping her hand in silent gratitude. But the reckoning loomed. The report would detail her unsanctioned move, the risk to the op, the breach of protocol. In the vibrating cabin, with rotors thumping overhead, Elena secured Zara beside the Elder, her hands steady on the medkit. The cost of integrity was just beginning to unfold, ripples already forming through the ranks. The Black Hawk's cabin vibrated with the relentless thump of rotors, the air thick with the metallic scent of spent casings and the faint copper tang of blood from Zara's wound. Elena sat strapped in, her plate carrier unbuckled just enough to access the medkit, methodically cleaning and dressing the girl's injury under the dim red glow of the overhead light. Zara's breathing was shallow but steady, her dark eyes fixed on Elena with a mix of gratitude and wariness, the Elder, her father, clutching her hand across the narrow aisle. Major Reed occupied the jump seat opposite, his jaw set like a vice, arms crossed over his chest plate, the lines around his eyes deepening in the shadows. He hadn't spoken since takeoff, but his silence was louder than any reprimand, a storm brewing in the disciplined confines of the helo. Petty Officer Hale shifted beside Elena, his rifle secured between his knees, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a gloved hand. He caught her eye, offering a subtle nod, the kind forged in the grind of Hell Week, where words were unnecessary and trust was survival. "Good call," he murmured under the engine noise, low enough for only her to hear. Elena didn't respond, her focus on the pressure bandage, the adhesive pulling taut against Zara's skin. The op had succeeded on paper. Primary asset recovered, hostiles neutralized, no casualties on their side. But the after-action would tell a different story, one of deviation, of a SEAL officer breaking formation to retrieve a secondary without clearance. The LZ at the forward operating base materialized below, floodlights cutting through the dusk like search beams, the ground crew signaling with illuminated wands. The helo touched down with a jolt, skids kissing the packed dirt, and the ramp dropped in a hiss of hydraulics. Medics swarmed forward, their boots kicking up dust as they stretchered the Elder toward the aid station, Zara insisting on walking beside him, supported by Elena's arm. Reed was first out, barking orders to the ground team. Secure the bird, debrief in 5, full team, no exceptions. His gaze lingered on Elena, sharp and assessing, before he strode toward the command tent, the weight of his authority trailing like rotor wash. Inside the base, the evening routine hummed on, generators rumbling in the distance, the crackle of field radios from the ops center, the distant bark of a sentry dog patrolling the wire. Elena handed Zara off to the female medic on duty, a Navy corpsman named Patel, who spoke a smattering of Pashto and could handle the interrogation light intake. "She's a non-combatant," Elena explained, voice level, handing over the satchel of supplies Zara had clutched during exfil. "Treated coalition before, might have intel on supply routes." Patel nodded, her expression neutral. But Elena caught the flicker of curiosity. Word would spread fast in a base this size. Hale fell in step beside her as they headed to the briefing tent, the cool mountain air raising gooseflesh under their sweat-damp uniforms. "Reed's not gonna let that slide," he said quietly, scanning the perimeter out of habit. "You know how HQ is about protocol. No negotiations, no side quests." Elena adjusted her patrol cap, the fabric rough against her fingers. She was bleeding out. Leaving her would have been the same as pulling the trigger. Hale grunted, a sound of reluctant agreement, but his eyes scanned her face for cracks, the vulnerability that Bud S. beat out of you but never fully erased. The debrief tent was a Spartan affair, folding chairs around a scarred table. Walls papered with sat maps and threat overlays, the air heavy with the aroma of MRE heaters and machine oil. The platoon assembled, still in full kit, faces streaked with camo paint and grime. Reed stood at the head, a laptop open to the mission log, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a salute. "Report, objectives secured at 1830 hours. Elder and medical, stable. Hostiles down, 4, confirmed. Exfil clean." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before locking on Elena. "Except for the unauthorized retrieval. Lieutenant Vasquez, explain." The tent fell silent, the only sound the faint static from the tactical radio on the table. Elena stood, posture ramrod straight, hands clasped behind her back. "Sir." During withdrawal, the secondary Zara attempted to follow. She was wounded, non-hostile, and indicated knowledge of rebel caches. I assessed the risk low and proceeded unarmed to assist. Murmurs rippled through the team, heads turning, some nods of respect, others tight-lipped skepticism. Hale kept his eyes forward, but his boot tapped once against the chair leg, a silent anchor. Reed's expression didn't change, but his fingers drummed once on the table. "Assessed? This isn't a solo op, Lieutenant. HQ's standing order, primary only. No deviations, no matter the sob story." He pulled up the comms log on the screen, timestamps glowing. "You overrode my direct negative. That's a breach. Endangers the team, the asset, the mission." Elena met his stare, her voice steady, the words measured like rounds in a magazine. "Understood, sir. But protocol doesn't account for every variable on the ground. She saved lives before. She could again." The room tensed, operators shifting in their seats, the weight of the chain of command pressing down. One of the younger petty officers, Ramirez, spoke up unbidden. "She went in empty-handed, sir. Balls of steel." Reed shot him a look that silenced the tent, then turned back to Elena. "This goes up the line. JAG review by 0600. You're confined to quarters pending investigation. No contact with the assets." He dismissed the team with a curt wave, but as they filed out, whispers followed Elena like shadows, respect from some, doubt from others. Hale clapped her shoulder once outside the tent, the gesture brief but firm. "You did right. They'll see it." Back in her hooch, a cramped plywood shelter with a cot, footlocker, and a single bulb, Elena stripped off her gear, the clink of buckles echoing in the quiet. The base settled into night routine, patrols changing shifts, the low hum of generators, a distant helo spooling up for recon. She sat on the cot, staring at the trident pin on her uniform, its gold edges catching the light. Zara's words replayed in her mind, the plea for her father, the hidden supplies that could tip the scales in the valley. But the cost was mounting. Her career on the line, the platoon's trust tested, Reed's report already winging its way to Coronado. Outside, footsteps approached. Hale, slipping in with 2 MREs and a thermos of coffee, his face etched with the day's fatigue. "Elder asked for you," he said, handing her a packet. "Says you're the one who brought his daughter back. Calls it a debt." Elena accepted the food, the plastic crinkling in her hands. Loyalty like that, father to daughter, team to team, cut deeper than orders. But as the investigation loomed, the public reckoning would force it all into the open. Tribunal whispers, media leaks from local assets, the institution's gaze turning inward. By midnight, the base radio crackled with an incoming priority. HQ demanding full details, the elders' debrief revealing Zara's role in smuggling meds to both sides. Elena's choice had ripples, potential intel gold, but at the price of her standing. She lay back, the cot creaking, staring at the canvas ceiling as wind rattled the flaps. The line between duty and conscience blurred further, and the morning would demand she defend it. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far stories of courage and integrity can reach. The first light of dawn filtered through the narrow slats of Elena's hooch, painting thin stripes across the concrete floor where dust motes danced in the stale air. She hadn't slept more than an hour, the cot springs digging into her back like unanswered questions. The base stirred outside, boots crunching on gravel as the morning guard shift changed, the distant rumble of a Humvee convoy firing up for perimeter patrol. The sharp scent of diesel cutting through the canvas walls. Elena swung her legs over the edge, pulling on her boots with mechanical precision, the leather creaking softly. Confinement to quarters meant no PT, no range time, just the weight of waiting, her mind replaying the ops' final moments, Zara's hand in hers, the helo's downdraft whipping sand into their faces, Reed's unspoken judgment hanging heavier than the rotor noise. A knock rattled the door, 2 sharp raps, military courtesy. It was Hale, his silhouette filling the frame as he stepped in, carrying a steaming mug and a folded printout from the ops center. "Coffee black," he said, handing it over, the ceramic warm against her palms. His uniform was fresh, but fatigue shadowed his eyes, the scar on his jaw more pronounced in the pale light. "Reed's been on the horn, with Coronado since 0400. JAG's fast-tracking it. Full inquiry by noon. You're to report to the command post." Elena nodded, sipping the bitter brew, the heat grounding her. "Any word from medical?" Hale leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his posture relaxed but alert. The way swim buddies did when the surf was rough. "Elder's stable, name's Kareem. Zara's with him, cooperating. She's giving up routes on rebel resupply lines, stuff that lines up with what she told you. Patel says it's solid intel, could reroute patrols for weeks." He paused, glancing at the printout. "But that's not why they're pissed. It's the breach, going in unarmed, overriding the CO. HQ's calling it unauthorized engagement with potential hostiles." The words landed like a spent casing, cold and final. Elena set the mug down, unfolding the paper. A formal notice from Naval Special Warfare Command, stamped and terse. "Lieutenant Elena Vasquez, under investigation for violation of ROE and chain of command during Operation Shadow Retrieval. Immediate suspension from field duties. Report for deposition." She traced the embossed seal with her thumb, the gold ink glinting dully. Years of quals, SQT scores in the 90th percentile, deployments without a single flag, reduced to this, a single choice in the dust of Karabat. "They'll want my side," she said, voice even, folding it away. "Facts first." Hale pushed off the wall, clapping her shoulder once. "Stick to ground truth. The team's got your back. Ramirez already put in a statement. Quiet reform starts with guys like us." He slipped out, leaving the door ajar, the base's morning hum filtering in. A sergeant's call for muster, the metallic slide of a bolt carrier group being tested at the armory. The command post tent was a hive of controlled urgency by the time Elena arrived, her boots echoing on the wet concrete pad outside, overnight dew from the brief mountain chill. Inside, the air was cooler, laced with the ozone tang of printers and the low buzz of encrypted comms. Major Reed stood at a central table, flanked by two JAG officers in crisp khakis, their notebooks open like open wounds. Captain Ellis, the lead investigator, was a wiry man from Pendleton. His glasses perched on a sharp nose, voice clipped as he gestured her to a chair. "Lieutenant Vasquez, sit. This is informal for now. Deposition to build the record. No counsel yet, but you can request it." Elena took the seat, posture straight, hands flat on her thighs, the vinyl cool through her trousers. Reed avoided her eyes, focusing on a tablet screen, his fingers tapping coordinates from the op. Ellis leaned forward, recorder whirring to life. "Walk us through the extraction phase. Timestamp 1825 hours. Post-breach, primary secured. Your transmission. Stand down. I'm going back for the secondary." "Why?" The question hung, the tense canvas walls seeming to close in. The faint crackle of a radio in the corner, underscoring the isolation. Elena met Ellis's gaze, her words measured, each one chosen like a round chambered. "Sir, as we withdrew, the secondary, Zara, pursued on foot. She was wounded from debris in the firefight, non-hostile per visual assessment. No weapon, attempting to reach her father, the primary. Leaving her exposed risked compromise. Rebel stragglers were regrouping 200 meters out. I evaluated threat level minimal and moved to assist, hands visible to de-escalate." Ellis scribbled, his pen scratching like dry brush on rock. "Evaluated unilaterally. Major Reed's order was negative, direct from the net. You overrode a superior. Protocol states primary asset only. Secondaries fall under local forces or air evac if feasible. Your action endangered the platoon, diverted fire support, delayed exfil by 90 seconds. Reed finally spoke, his tone flat, the authority in it unyielding. "It was my call on the ground, Captain. Vasquez knew the directive. No negotiations, no risks beyond the objective. HQ's policy exists for a reason. Keeps ops clean, saves lives long term." He glanced at her then, a flicker of conflict in his eyes, the lines of his face tightening. The elder's gratitude, the intel haul. Those were footnotes now, overshadowed by the breach. Elena kept her breathing steady, the scent of fresh printed reports mingling with the earthy dampness seeping under the tent flap. "Understood, sir. But on the ground, variables shift. Zara's prior cooperation with coalition medics was in her satchel. Visible supplies, no ordnance. Extracting her yielded actionable intel on caches, confirmed in debrief. The risk was calculated. No shots fired at me. Team covered effectively." Murmurs from the JAG aides, heads nodding slightly, procedural realism clashing with the human element. Ellis adjusted his glasses, flipping a page. "Witness statements vary. Petty Officer Hale corroborates your assessment of low threat. Ramirez calls it decisive leadership. But others, sniper lead notes, diverted attention could have escalated if rebels pressed. And the media angle, local assets are talking. A woman SEAL going in unarmed. That's leaking to Kabul press by evening." The public reckoning sharpened, the institution's machinery grinding toward visibility. Elena felt the ripple, her trident at stake, but so was the precedent. When conscience intersected duty, did the system bend or break? The deposition dragged into midday, questions probing like bayonets, intent, alternatives, the moment her finger hesitated on the trigger. Elena answered without evasion, her voice a steady cadence amid the tense growing heat, sweat beading under her collar. By the end, Ellis closed his notebook with a snap. "You'll get the formal charges by 1800. Suspended pending board review. Could be reprimand, could be worse. Dismissed. Outside, the sun beat down, turning the base into a furnace, mirages shimmering off the helipads. Hale waited by the chow hall, tray in hand, but Eleanor waved him off, heading to medical instead. Zara sat on a cot in the partitioned ward, bandaged arm in a sling, her father dozing nearby under IV drip. The corpsman, Patel, nodded her through. "She's asking for you," Patel said softly, the air heavy with antiseptic and the low beep of monitors. Zara looked up, her expression softening, a small smile breaking through the exhaustion. In halting English, she extended a hand. "You came back for me." Elena took it, the grip firm despite the weakness, the bond instant and unspoken, like handler to K9, loyalty beyond words. "Duty isn't just orders," Elena replied quietly. "It's what we carry forward." Outside, a chopper lifted off, its shadow passing over the tent, carrying reports to higher echelons. The reform was stirring, whispers in the ranks, a woman's choice challenging the rigid lines, the cost of integrity etching deeper into the stone of military legacy. But as Zara shared more details of the caches, mapping them on a scrap of paper, Elena knew the tribunal would test it all, the quiet courage under scrutiny just beginning to forge change. The midday sun hammered the base like an unyielding interrogator, turning the air above the tarmac into a shimmering haze that distorted the outlines of idling Humvees and stacked ammo crates. Eleanor walked the perimeter path alone, her boots scuffing against the gravel in a deliberate rhythm, the confinement order chafing more than the sweat soaking her PT shirt. Jag had cleared her for limited movement, escorted walks to clear her head, they called it, but the eyes of the base followed her. A sentry pausing mid-patrol, two techs whispering by the fuel depot, their glances lingering like unanswered radio calls. Word had spread faster than a flashbang, the story of her unarmed return filtering through the ranks like sand through a sieve. No one approached, but the weight of their scrutiny pressed in, a silent tribunal of its own. Back in the hooch, the folded notice from HQ lay on her footlocker, its edges crisp against the scarred wood. Suspension meant no ops, no quals, just reports and reflections, the institutional machine grinding her choice into precedents and penalties. Elena sat on the cot, tracing the trident tattoo on her forearm. The ink faded from salt water and sun, but sharp in memory. Bud S. had taught her to endure, the surf torture, log PT, the endless evolution where quitting was the only failure. But this was different. No physical break, just the erosion of trust in the chain. Reed's report, she knew, painted it black and white, deviation from ROE, potential compromise of the platoon. Yet Zara's intel had already rerouted a patrol, neutralizing a rebel convoy before it hit the highway. Facts versus protocol, the moral tension coiling tighter. A shadow fell across the door flap, and Hale ducked in, his expression guarded, carrying a tablet under his arm. "Perimeter's clear," he said, the code for no tails. He handed her the device, screen glowing with a secure message chain. From Patel, Zara's debrief is gold. Caches mapped to the wadi north of Karabat, meds and small arms. Karim's backing her story, says you saved his bloodline. Elena scrolled through the attachments, hand-sketched grids, timestamps aligning with drone overwatch. Human emotion flickered in the margins. Zara's note, scrawled in shaky English. You saw me as person, not enemy. Thank. The words hit like a gloved fist, a reminder of the vulnerability beneath the ranks, the quiet bonds that orders couldn't sever. "But it's leaking," Hale continued, voice low, leaning against the plywood wall where the grain was worn smooth from years of pacing officers. Local stringers in Kabul got wind. Female SEAL defies orders for Afghan girl. Al Jazeera's sniffing. Our PR flaks in damage control. He rubbed his jaw, the scar pulling tight. "Reed's briefing the colonel now. If it hits the wire, HQ'll bury it or spin it. Hero or hothead, no middle." Eleanor handed back the tablet, her fingers brushing his in the exchange, a subtle anchor in the storm. Loyalty like theirs didn't need speeches. It was the shared silence after a dive, the mutual check of gear before infill. "They can spin what they want," she said, standing to stretch, the muscles in her shoulders protesting the inactivity. Ground truth doesn't change. She wasn't a threat. She was a bridge. The afternoon brought the formal summons. "Report to the command post for the board prelim." A trio of officers convened under the colonel's authority. Elena geared up minimally, uniform pressed, boots polished to a dull shine, the ritual of preparation steadying her pulse. The walk across base felt longer, the sun baking the concrete until it radiated heat through her soles, the distant crack of small arms fire from the range, a mocking echo of normalcy. Inside the tent the air was stale, fans whirring futilely against the build-up of tension. Colonel Harlan Graves sat at the head, a silver-haired lifer from Delta days, his eyes like chipped flint under bushy brows. Flanking him, Reed, notebook in hand, and a JAG major from Bagram, her uniform starched to immobility. "Lieutenant Vasquez," Graves began, his voice gravel over steel, gesturing to the lone chair. "At ease. This board reviews the incident for commendation or corrective action. Your deposition's on record. We'll hear from witnesses next." Elena sat, back straight, the metal frame cool against her spine. The room smelled of ink and old coffee, maps pinned to the walls showing the valley's veins, routes now secured because of her call. Reed spoke first, his testimony measured. "Sir, the op succeeded, but Lieutenant Vasquez's action introduced unnecessary risk, overrode my command, entered hostile zone unarmed, precedents clear, no deviations." Graves nodded, turning to Elena. "Your rationale?" She met his gaze, words flowing like a well-rehearsed brief. "Sir, the secondary asset, Zara, was a verified non-combatant, wounded and pursuing our position. Abandoning her violated the broader ROE on protecting civilians in extremis. Her extraction provided intel yielding 2 confirmed neutralizations post-op. The decision balanced immediate threat against long-term mission integrity. The JAG Major interjected, pen poised, and the chain, Major Reed's negative, was explicit. Elena paused, the human cost surfacing in her mind, Zara's trembling hand, the elder's nod of debt. "Chain of command is foundational, ma'am, but on the ground, it's adaptive. Conscience isn't mutiny, it's the oath we all swear, to defend, not just obey blindly." Murmurs rippled, Graves's fingers drumming the table once, the sound sharp in the hush. Outside, a helo thumped overhead, its shadow fleeting across the canvas, carrying fresh troops or perhaps the press of the story outward. The board adjourned for deliberation, leaving Elena to wait in an antechamber, the bench hard under her, radio static from adjacent ops, a low underscore. Hale slipped in briefly, expression taut. Teams circulating statements, quiet support. Ramirez says it's stirring talk in the mess. When does duty include mercy? His words carried the emotion of the ranks, subtle gestures of solidarity. A salute held a beat longer, a shared meal tray. By evening, the base cooled, the sun dipping behind the hills in a blaze of copper, casting long shadows over the wire. Elena returned to medical unescorted, the order loosened for asset contact. Zara was up, walking the ward with her father's arm. Their laughter soft in Pashto, a sound foreign yet fitting amid the beeps and bandages. Patel waved her over, the corpsman's face lined with the day's shifts. "She's tough, stitches holding. Told me about you, the woman who walked in like no gun could stop her." Zara turned, eyes bright, extending a small woven bracelet from her satchel. "For you, from village, loyalty." Elena accepted it. the fibers rough against her wrist, tying it beside her dog tags, a symbol of the bond, handler to charge, transcending uniforms. But the reckoning escalated. A runner from comms delivered a flash, Kabul media confirming the leak, headlines framing her as a rogue hero. HQ's response crackled over the net. Stand down all comments. Investigation elevated. Reed passed her in the corridor. His nod, curt but not cold, a hint of the conflict within the hierarchy. Board reconvenes at 0600. Fight clean, Vasquez. The public eye turned, witnesses multiplying, team, assets, press, the institution's justice now a spotlight on moral courage. Elena lay in her hooch that night, the bracelet a quiet weight, wind whispering through the flaps like unanswered queries. Her choice rippled outward, challenging the rigid lines, forging paths where conscience met command, the legacy of one unarmed step, etching into the annals of quiet reform. The first hints of dawn crept over the Hindu Kush, a pale grey light seeping through the command post's canvas seams, carrying the chill bite of high altitude that settled into bones like unspoken doubts. Elena stood outside the tent, her breath visible in short puffs, hands clasped behind her back as she waited for the board to reconvene. The base was stirring methodically, a distant generator coughing to life, the scrape of mess hall trays being stacked, the low murmur of early shift operators checking their kit under floodlights. Her uniform was immaculate, trousers creased, blouse tucked with precision, but the bracelet from Zara tugged at her wrist beneath the cuff, a hidden talisman against the institutional grind ahead. Inside, the air hung heavy with the residue of overnight deliberations, cooling coffee in chipped mugs, the faint ozone whiff from the secure printer churning out witness affidavits. Colonel Graves entered first, his boots thudding on the reinforced floor mats, followed by Reed and the JAG Major, her face set in the neutral mask of procedure. They took their seats without preamble, Graves nodding Eleanor to hers. Lieutenant, the board's reviewed prelims. Media leaks confirmed, Reuters picked it up at 0200 Zulu. HQ's directing no comment, but this elevates to full tribunal. We'll hear closing arguments now. Elena's posture remained unyielding, the metal chair frame pressing into her spine like a reminder of endurance evolutions past. Reed spoke first, his voice steady, each word placed like a pin on a sat map. Sir, the incident undermines operational security. Vasquez's unilateral action, entering the zone unarmed, exposed her to capture or worse, potentially compromising the platoon if rebels had pressed. Protocol exists to mitigate such variables. Deviation invites chaos. Recommend formal reprimand and 6-month suspension from DevGru rotations. He slid a folder across the table, pages filled with comms logs and risk assessments, the paper whispering against the wood. The JAG Major adjusted her notes, her pen clicking once. Concur on breach of chain. However, post-op yields, 2 caches neutralized, patrol routes secured, suggest tactical value. Still, precedent matters. We can't have officers freelancing on ROE. Graves leaned back, his fingers steepled, eyes fixed on Elena with the weight of command years. The tent flap rustled in a gust, carrying the scent of dew-kissed earth and distant wood smoke from the Afghan dawn. Your rebuttal, Lieutenant? Elena met his gaze, her response measured, voice carrying the clipped cadence of briefings honed in Coronado sandpits. Sir, the action aligned with the spirit of ROE, protect non-combatants in extremis, minimize civilian harm. Zara's pursuit indicated immediate vulnerability, wounded, unarmed, in the kill zone. My assessment on site prioritized mission integrity over rigid extraction parameters. Intel gained has prevented 3 projected ambushes, per this morning's Overwatch report. She paused, drawing a folded printout from her pocket, cleared by Patel earlier, the ink still fresh on cache coordinates that matched drone footage. Conscience isn't defiance. It's the oath's core. Defend the Constitution, and by extension the lives it shields. Murmurs from the aides outside the partition, the bored silence broken only by the tick of Graves's watch. He scanned her document, brow furrowing slightly, then set it aside. Noted, adjourned until 1400 for external input, dismissed. Eleanor rose, saluting crisply, the motion fluid despite the knot in her gut. Outside, the sun crested the ridges, bathing the base in harsh gold, shadows shortening as the day heated. Hale waited by a stack of sandbags, his rifle slung low, expression a mask of professional calm. Heard the media's framing you as the unarmed angel of Karabat, PR's sweating bullets. She fell in step beside him, their boots sinking on the gravel path toward the aid station, the air warming with the promise of another scorcher. Doesn't change the facts, Elena replied, her gloved hand flexing unconsciously around the bracelet's weave. The walk passed checkpoints without incident, sentries nodding, their eyes holding a beat longer, respect or reservation unspoken. In the medical tent, the fluorescent hum greeted them, mingled with the sharp tang of iodine and the soft beeps of monitors. Zara was seated on a stool, her arm sling adjusted, sketching more details on a notepad under Patel's watchful eye. The elder, Karim, stood nearby, his pakol hat straight, murmuring encouragements in Pashto. Zara looked up, her face lighting with recognition, the bruise on her cheek fading to yellow. "You come again," she said, extending the notepad, lines tracing hidden trails through the wadis, marked with symbols for meds and munitions. Elena took it gently, the paper crinkling, her fingers brushing Zara's in a gesture of quiet alliance. "This helps everyone," she said softly, the words bridging the gap between worlds. Karim stepped forward, his grip firm as he clasped her forearm in the old way, eyes conveying a debt deeper than language. "You walked where others fear. Honor like mountain, unbreakable." The moment hung, human vulnerability piercing the clinical air, a hand trembling not from pain but gratitude. Patel pulled Elena aside near the partition, her voice low amid the rustle of supply crates. Tribunals pulling in witnesses. Hale, Ramirez, even me for the intake. Words out, your call saved her, and the intel's shifting ops in the valley. But HQ's leaning hard on protocol could ding your trident if they push. Elena nodded, the weight settling like added plate armor. Loyalty rippled through the ranks, subtle nods in the chow line. A shared thermos from Ramirez, but the institution demanded balance, justice weighed against order. By midday, the base thrummed with amplified tension, extra patrols on the wire, comms officers monitoring Afghan frequencies for leaks, the distant crack of a controlled demo echoing like a punctuation. Elena returned to the command post alone, the sun baking the concrete until it radiated through her soles, sweat tracing lines down her back. The board reconvened under tighter security, a captain from Kabul liaison added to the panel, his tablet glowing with press clippings. "Media's global now," he stated flatly, scrolling headlines in English and Dari. "SEAL defies orders in daring rescue, anonymous sources, likely locals. HQ wants containment, but it's public. How does this reflect on unit discipline?" Reed shifted, his chair creaking. "It tests it, sir. Vasquez's integrity is unquestioned, but actions like this erode command trust. Recommend counseling and reassignment, non-field." Elena countered evenly, the room's heat mirroring the scrutiny. "Sir, it highlights adaptive leadership. The rescue preserved a key asset. Zara's cooperation extends to bridging locals, reducing insurgent sway. Legacy isn't in blind obedience, it's in moral courage that strengthens the chain." Graves absorbed it, his expression unchanging, but a subtle nod escaped, the first crack in the rigid facade. The sessions stretched into afternoon, testimonies filtering in via secure link. Hale's steady account of covering fire, Ramirez's praise for her de-escalation, even a clipped statement from the helo pilot on the smooth exfil. Outside, wind picked up, whipping dust devils across the pads, the scent of rotor grease and jet fuel underscoring the machinery of justice. As the board deliberated final recommendations, Eleanor stood at attention in the antechamber, the walls closing in with procedural weight. Her choice, unarmed steps in the camp, had ignited reform whispers, revised ROE briefs in the mess, officers debating conscience in quiet corners. But the cost lingered, careers and reputations in the balance, the institution's response a forge for quiet transformation. Hale met her outside as shadows lengthened, the sun dipping toward the hills in a blaze of amber. "They're leaning commendation with caveats," he murmured, handing her a water bottle, the plastic cool in the fading heat. "Your story's reaching higher. Could change how we handle secondaries." Eleanor uncapped it, the liquid steadying her, the bracelet a faint pressure against her skin. Public eyes watched, but within the ranks, loyalty endured. The silent bond of those who chose right over rote, rippling toward redemption. If this story already has your respect, hit the like button. It helps the story of Elena Vasquez reach those who still believe in honor. The sun had surrendered to the encroaching dusk, leaving the forward operating base bathed in the soft glow of sodium lamps that hummed along the perimeter wire. Elena stood at the edge of the helipad, her silhouette sharp against the fading horizon, the distant peaks of the Hindu Kush dissolving into indigo shadows. The air carried the crisp edge of nightfall, mingled with the faint rotor grease from a Black Hawk cooling on its skids nearby. Her boots grounded her on the packed earth, but her mind replayed the board's final murmurs. Graves's measured nod, Reed's reluctant concession, the JAG Major's pen scratching the last notations. The tribunal had adjourned hours ago, but the weight of decision lingered like dew on the tents. Hale approached from the op-center path, his steps deliberate, the gravel crunching under his tread. He stopped a respectful distance away, hands in his pockets, the lines of his face softened by the low light. "It's official," he said, voice low and even, pulling a sealed envelope from his cargo pocket. "Board recommendation. No formal charges. Letter of counseling on the record, protocol adherence emphasis, but commendation for the intel yield. You're cleared for rotation with a nod to adaptive judgment under fire." He handed it over, the paper crisp, stamped with the command seal that felt heavier than her plate carrier ever had. Elena took it, unfolding the document under the lamp's yellow pool, the words blurring slightly before sharpening. Recognition of her actions as instrumental in securing actionable intelligence, preventing projected casualties. No mention of the breach, but the subtext was there. A quiet acknowledgement that conscience had bent the rules without breaking the mission. "Reed sign off?" she asked, folding it away, the envelope sliding into her breast pocket like a secured magazine. "Affirmative," Hale replied, glancing toward the command tent where lights still burned. He pushed for the counseling, but Graves overrode on the commendation. He said it sets a precedent. When ground truth collides with orders, we review, not just reprimand. A faint smile tugged at his scar, the first crack in the day's tension. They walked back toward the hooches together, the base settling into evening routine, generators throttling down, the metallic clink of mess kits being stowed, a sentry's radio crackling with position checks. The public reckoning had peaked that afternoon. Kabul press releases sanitized by HQ, framing the op as a successful asset recovery with local cooperation. But whispers in the ranks painted the fuller picture, her unarmed steps becoming legend in hushed Chow Hall talks. Inside the medical tent, the atmosphere had shifted from urgency to quiet recovery. Fluorescent strips buzzed overhead, casting clinical shadows on the partitioned cots where Karim dozed under a thin blanket, his breathing rhythmic against the backdrop of distant wind. Zara sat nearby, her sling removed, testing her arm's mobility with careful flexes, the fresh bandage white against her olive skin. Patel looked up from inventorying supplies, her nod approving as Elena entered. "Debriefs wrapped," the corpsman said softly, stacking vials on a metal tray. "Zara's cleared for transfer to Bagram tomorrow, protected status thanks to her intel. She's been mapping more routes, could save a dozen patrols." Zara rose, her movements tentative, but gaining strength, crossing the short distance to Elena. In her hand was another small token, a folded cloth embroidered with mountain motifs, simple threads weaving patterns of endurance. "For your journey," she said, pressing it into Elena's palm, the fabric warm from her grasp. "You teach us. One step changes river." Elena accepted it, the gesture sealing the bond, a silent exchange of loyalty that echoed the trust between operator and overwatch. Karim stirred, his eyes opening to meet hers, a nod conveying depths no translation could capture. "Daughter lives because of your heart. Village remembers." Elena clasped Zara's hand briefly, the contact firm yet restrained, emotion emerging in the steady hold rather than words. "You bridged what walls divide," she replied, voice level. "That's the real legacy." As she left the tent, the night air cooled further, carrying the faint scent of sage from the valleys below. Hale waited outside, rifle slung over his shoulder for the evening patrol. "Teams rotating you to lead quals back in Coronado," he said, falling in step. "Reed mentioned it. Mentorship role, incorporating ethical decision evolutions into training. Your calls sparking revisions. ROE briefs now include scenarios on non-combatant pursuits, weighing intel potential against protocol." The revelation settled over Elena like the first light of a new dawn patrol. Ripples expanding beyond the individual, the institution adapting in measured increments. No fanfare, no medals pinned under spotlights, just the quiet reform of updated field manuals and classroom discussions where officers debated the line between obedience and oath. Her suspension lifted, but the counseling stayed, a scar like Hale's, reminder of vulnerability in the chain. As they reached the hooch line, Ramirez and a cluster of petty officers paused mid-conversation, their salutes crisp, held a fraction longer than regulation. No words passed, but the respect was palpable, a subtle shift in the ranks where moral courage became the unspoken standard. In the dim confines of her shelter, Elena unpacked her gear methodically, plate carrier hung on the hook, M4 racked in the corner, the trident pin catching the bulb's glow on her footlocker. The envelope and cloth joined her dog tags, symbols of transformation. The soldier who walked unarmed now a touchstone for those facing similar fractures. Outside, the base quieted fully, last helo spooling down, stars pricking the vast sky, the wind whispering through guy lines like radio static fading to silence. Elena lay back on the cot, the springs creaking once, her mind mapping future ops not just by terrain, but by the human contours within. Duty and conscience, once at odds, now intertwined, her integrity forging a legacy of strength amid the rigid hierarchy. By week's end, the platoon redeployed stateside, the valley's threats diminished by the caches Zara's maps had exposed. Elena stood on the C-17's ramp at Bagram, the Afghan dust swirling in farewell eddies, Hale at her side for the long haul back to Coronado. Reed approached last, his handshake firm, eyes meeting hers squarely. "You tested the system," he said, voice low over the jet whine. "Made it better. Lead by example. Always." The ramp lifted, sealing them in, the aircraft's hum building to takeoff thrust. Below, the landscape receded, but the change endured. A woman's choice rippling through commands, proving that true reform blooms from moral roots. The cost of integrity yielding a stronger whole. Subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and justice within the ranks. Thank you for watching the case of "We Don't Negotiate with Rebels," HQ declared. But the woman SEAL went to their camp unarmed. See you in the next one.